ready to show exactly how resilient we are as a party. Together, we're going to create a policy platform that speaks to the needs of people across this province. We're going to talk to people in communities from every corner of the province so that we can show what it looks like to have a government that listens and cares.
Mississauga Mayor Bonnie Crombie is the new leader of the Ontario Liberals, as you heard there, narrowly defeating some federal MP rivals on a third ballot and setting up her fight against Ontario Premier Doug Ford. The two collaborated through the COVID-19 pandemic, but are now set for maybe a bitter battle, with the newly minted leader setting her sights squarely on the Premier. The front bench is here to talk about what we can expect. Joining me this evening, Dan Moulton. He's a former senior advisor to the Liberal Ontario governments of Dalton McGuinty and Kathleen Wynne. He's now a partner with Crestview Strategy. Shakir Chambers worked in Prime Minister Stephen Harper's office before becoming a policy advisor to the International Trade Minister. He's now a principal at Earnscliffe Strategies. Anne McGrath is national director of the NDP, and Laura Stone is a Queen's Park reporter for the Globe and Mail. Hi, everybody. Happy Monday. Laura, you were there this weekend, actively reporting on everything that was happening. What do people who are not living in Ontario right now need to know about Bonnie Crombie and what she says she's going to do with the party?
It was a great way to spend a Saturday, Vassy, I'll tell you that, with Dan as well. Look, I mean, Bonnie Crombie is a very well-known politician in Ontario, particularly in the Greater Toronto area. She's taking over the helm of the Liberal Party, which held government for 15 years, but has really struggled since the 2018 election. They were reduced to just 7 seats. They failed to gain traction under the previous leader in the last election. They now only have 9 seats in the legislature. They don't even have enough for official party status. They don't have a lot of resources. And Bonnie Crombie has kind of come in with, a centrist position, I'll say. She calls herself fiscally responsible. At times during the campaign, she said she would govern from the right of center, and she got into a bit of trouble for that. And she says, she's going to rebuild the party. She raised a lot of money. She's well known, as I said, in the Greater Toronto area. And I think key to this is she rankles Premier Doug Ford and the Progressive Conservatives. They have set their sights on her throughout this leadership campaign. They release attack ads against her. And funnily enough, Doug Ford and Bonnie Crombie sort of attack each other for being the same thing, which is kind of a quote unquote wealthy elitist who's out of touch with real people, too cozy with developers. They're both saying that about one another. So it's actually going to be a very interesting time in Ontario to politics to see how Bonnie Crombie can rebuild this party, if she can gain traction, and how she takes on Premier Doug Ford.
I mentioned, Dan, in the introduction that Bonnie Crombie won on the third ballot. Her supporters had been kind of conveying to the media that they thought she would take it on the first. A win is a win, for sure. But do we take anything from that? Like, were you surprised at how well, for example, Nathaniel Erskine-Smith did?
I wasn't surprised. It was a very competitive race. I was a bit puzzled in the lead up to the convention that there was some spin. She would win on the first ballot. I had never seen evidence of that. It was clear she was going to perform well, but a first ballot victory I didn't see in the cards. It was a competitive race. There was a lot of energy in it. It was long. It was dynamic. It challenged, I think, all of the participants in the race to really up their game. And Nate really, I think, responded to that moment in a really a strong way. It demonstrated in results. Bonnie took it on the third ballot. I think Liberals are pretty good at rallying behind leaders after a leadership contest. I think we'll see that happen pretty expeditiously here. She's going to get down to the work of rebuilding the party, of fundraising, as Laura talked about. That's the top priority. We've got to rebuild that machine, get back to a place where party staff and party operations are in a place where they're ready for the next election. They're ready to take on Doug Ford. That's going to take a lot of work, and she's going to get down to that right away.
Shakir, I had Rob Benzie from The Star on my radio show with Laura earlier today, and he said, Bonnie Crombie lives in Doug Ford's head rent-free. Like, every time he's on in the legislature and he mentions her name around Doug Ford, he'll stop and start kind of talking about it. Can you expand on that from a strategic perspective? Do you anticipate the Tories are worried now that she's clinched it and it's real?
Yeah, listen, Bonnie Crombie is a mayor from the 905, right? These are regions that you need to win if you're going to form government in Ontario. So it makes sense for the Ford government to be worried about her. But I think the bigger issue here for Bonnie Crombie, I mean, Laura mentioned it. She's said that, kind of her governing philosophy is more from the center right. And you may not like Doug Ford, but he's not this right-wing politician, right? He very much does govern from the center. So I'm just curious, how is she going to contrast and differentiate herself from Doug Ford at the same time, not alienating or leaving behind the more progressive elements of the Liberal Party? That's what I want to see how that all plays out. I mean, in the leadership race, she occupied a certain role as a front runner, right? So everybody was hunting her, trying to get to her, trying to make sure that, she kind of falls off. And she did a very good job with her strategy and her tactics to win. Good for her and good for her team. But now she's the hunter, right? So what is she actually going to do to catch Doug Ford? What is she actually going to do to catch Merritt Stiles, the Ontario NDP leader? She doesn't have party status. She doesn't have the resources of an official party. So it's going to be a much bigger challenge for her to win the next election. And I hear a lot of folks say, if the federal election goes to Pierre Poilievre, we have this thing in Ontario where if it's a conservative federally, it's a liberal provincially. It's not going to be that easy. Just because if Pierre wins federally, it doesn't mean Bonnie Crombie is going to win provincially. She has a long haul ahead of her.
And what do you think about that point, particularly around will it be difficult for her to contrast herself? Because she's a centrist and so is Doug Ford.
Yeah, that's right. I would say that Bonnie Crombie and Doug Ford occupy pretty well the same space on the political spectrum. They are, like he's not like an ultra right like Pierre Poilievre type. He's a bit more populist, I would say, and Bonnie Crombie has identified herself as being on the centre right, and I think that the Ontario NDP is going to be able to position her and portray her as Ford light. And I don't think that goes very well. The other thing I wanted to add here is that across the country, provincial Liberal parties are not doing very well. And so, what's happening to the Liberals here in Ontario is not unlike what's happening in some other provinces where they are either marginal or non-existent. And so,
save for Newfoundland and Labrador.
Save for Newfoundland and Labrador, that's right. But the thing is that that is a big hill to climb, and it's not like it was a blip that 2 elections ago they were reduced to not being an official party anymore. It's now been 2 elections in a row. They have not been able to get traction, and I'm not sure that Bonnie Crombie is going to be able to do it for them.
It'll be interesting to see.
And while the 905 is important, I think her position on the political spectrum, being so close to Ford's, is not going to go over very well in Toronto itself.
Yeah, I just want to get you guys to weigh in quickly on Greg Fergus, but I would point out there are some polls around those elections that showed when they didn't even have a leader, they were closer to an election, the Liberals were polling quite good. So
yeah, they do better without a leader.
Well, we'll see. I mean, you never know what I know Dan wants to fight. In the absence of that, we'll see. I just quickly wanted to, we were talking about Greg Fergus earlier, and I'll get you to quickly weigh in on these calls, because at the convention, and Laura will know this video played, he says he didn't know where it was going to play, but he was kind of defending it, but he apologized at the same time. He's in his speaker's outfit. The Bloc and the Conservatives are calling for him to resign. The NDP wants it to go to the Proc. What do you think about it?
Well, I mean, I think it's his job and the job of his staff to know where a video is going to be played. I find it astounding that you wouldn't know, that you would do a video and not know where it was going to be played. So it is a big mistake. It's an important mistake. And I think that it's good that he apologized, but I do think it does need to go to Proc so that we can make sure that this doesn't happen again. I wouldn't put it at the same level as some other mistakes that have been made, but it is important.
In that specific office?
In that office, exactly.
Dan, what do you think?
He apologized for a reason. He recognized it was a mistake. I don't think it was a big mistake. I think it was a mistake to do it in the speaker's robes and in the office. I think if he could do it again, he'd probably have filmed the video somewhere else on his own phone doing a selfie or something like that. But he was wishing well to a hardworking Ontario politician, John Fraser, who's twice now served as interim leader of the Liberal Party, who deserves thanks from Canadians, Ontarians, and certainly from Liberals, and that's why he was paid tribute this weekend at the convention.
Yeah, I'm bringing it up. I don't want to take away from John Fraser or the tribute. It's just more whether the speaker, Shakir, should have been part of that in the speaker's outfit.
And he shouldn't have. And I think for a guy like Greg Fergus, who took the chair of saying bringing more stability to Parliament, removing the partisanship, it's just really poor judgment on his behalf. And I think now he opens himself up to a bunch of criticism, right? Anytime he does anything unfavorable or rules unfavorable to the Conservatives, you know exactly what they're going to say. So I think a lack of judgment, it just opens himself up to criticism down the road on any poor judgment towards the Conservatives.
Last word to you, Laura.
Well, I'll just say I also interviewed Greg Fergus for a John Fraser profile that I did leading into the convention. And the reason that I called him was because the party sent out an official itinerary of the rundown of the event, and it said there's going to be video tributes from Dalton McGuinty and Speaker of the Commons, Greg Fergus. So, I mean, it was at least the Liberal Party was sending it out in some public way to journalists and others to be aware of it, whether his office was aware of where it would be played, I can't say. But I mean, someone knew that that video was going to be played in the convention. I don't see all of the opposition parties, gunning for his resignation. I see only two, so I'm not sure that there'll be the will to do that. But it does seem kind of at least poised to get to committee and for this issue to be studied further.
Okay.